a table. We have space over here too. See. All right, perfect. Well, I'm just gonna jump in. So thank you guys for coming to the class. So I know we've done a lot of classes on the new laws. But I wanted to really take some time and do a deeper dive into the contract. So it's gonna look like a little bit of a review and then a little bit of a deeper dive into the contract. So a couple things as far as the review is concerned, okay, just to make sure everybody's crystal clear. You have to have a buyer representation agreement signed, okay? Has to be the MLS one or the John L. Scott one by every single buyer you represent, okay? Or decide to work with. I shouldn't even say represent, okay?
Even before open the door, right?
So the rule is it's before or whenever reasonably practical of rendering real estate services. So technically, opening a door is rendering real estate services. But because it says before or when reasonably practical, it gives you a little cushion. So if Kylie comes into my open house and she wants to see a house later, like, oh, Shy, I want to see this house on 123 Banana Street, I have to kind of play it out. I can't strong arm her into signing this contract, but I could say, hey, Kylie, Washington state law was just put into effect January 1st that a buyer, a potential buyer has to sign a buyer representation agreement. Thank you. And if Kylie is like, absolutely not, or if she's giving you a cold shoulder, you have to kind of play it a little bit by ear, okay? But there's strategies to make getting the form signed easier, like using the term to your advantage and exclusive versus non-exclusive. So I'll show Kylie, this is me personally, I would show her a house without it signed. But when she wants to go see more, I'm probably gonna maneuver that a little.
That's misdemeanor. Without signing, you open a door.
No. It says before or when reasonably practical. That's, don't use the M word in here.
I don't know, talk to you.
No, but it says before when reasonably practical. So if Kylie doesn't want to sign it, I can't force her to. So you can choose, this is a business decision. Okay? But I would say, okay, I'll show you this property and I need you to come and do a buyer consultation meeting with me. Or I could say, hey, I just need you to sign it for one day. After today, we rip it up. So there's ways to maneuver it. It is important that you give them the real estate, they renamed everything, so I fumble my words. So the Washington pamphlet, the agency Washington pamphlet. Before you have your buyer representation agreement signed, okay? So important. Super important, and I'm gonna come down hard on this one this year, and I usually don't do that very often. But you have to have your paperwork turned into Sky Slope within 2 days. Okay, so on Sunday, I get Kylie to sign this 1 day, non-exclusive buyer representation agreement. It's only 1 day. I still have 2 days to put it into Sky Slope. Okay. As of right now, you can email your buyer representation agreement to renton@johnlscott.com. Put in the subject line, Form 41, and the buyer's name. Then, when we have a contract, you have to re-upload it and put it in the checklist. This is going to be, this process for SkySlope is gonna be changing. We're working out some bugs right now, and Colin is gonna be, hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have some training classes on the calendar for SkySlope. Okay? All of the new forms are on our forms wall in the workroom. Good morning, Mr. Dupart.
Sorry, I'm late.
No worries. But the new forms are not in transaction desk yet. So be very, very careful with that. All of John L. Scott is working with the MLS to make this happen, but this is one of our things where we're a bit at their mercy. All right, moving forward. So I wanted to start with 3 steps, okay, to try to simplify this. If you're considering working with a buyer, step 1, and this is important. Hey, buyer, are you working with a broker? Have you signed a buyer representation agreement? Now, nobody's talking about this, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because I don't have the answer. But if I sign an exclusive agreement with Kylie, and later on I find out Kylie has an exclusive agreement with Kevin, I'm not really sure how that plays out. It's not being talked about yet. So you need to find out, are you working with someone? Yes. Did you sign an agreement? You're going to hear, I don't know.
Absolutely.
So then we could say, hey, Kylie, let's email your broker or the person and have them send you a copy of it so we can all see it for ourselves. Okay, so it's a really good practice to have. So that's step 1. Step 2 is giving the agency pamphlet. That has to happen before you have the buyer representation agreement signed. Step 3 is the buyer representation agreement. Now, again, that's just kind of the quick and the dirty. You know, you should have a consultation in there and conversations and all that fun stuff. But that's your 3-step process. So when you're signing a representation agreement, there's a couple things you should keep in mind. Is it exclusive or non-exclusive? Just like a relationship. Are we dating other people or are we one-on-one? What is the term? Now, the default term is 60, but the term is something you need to strategize with. If I just meet Kylie and I don't know her and I'm uncomfortable and she wants to see homes, I'm going to strategize and do it one day. But after Kylie falls in love with me and we decide to be exclusive, I'm probably going to bump that to 120 days. What is the area? Okay, you can do it by county. You can do it by city. You can do it however you want. Area is very, very open. And then compensation. You should read these forms inside and out so you can explain to a buyer what your compensation is and how it works. You're going to explain it to them when you go through the contract, but my fee is X. Okay, so buyer, my fee is $20,000. Now I'm just pulling that number out of my hat because we're getting, not saying percentages. And if the seller offers $20,000, fantastic. And in the event the seller offers more, this is what happens. And in the event the seller offers less, this is what happens. You need to know what your business is. What is your business practice? Okay. All right. So we are going to start with the John L. Scott Buyer Representation Agreement. Okay. You can use the John L. Scott forms or you can use the MLS forms. It is imperative you do not mix and match. So what I mean by that is we have 3 main forms, okay? We have luckily all the numbers are the same. So we have a John L. Scott 41, which is the representation, and we have an MLS 41, which is the representation. Then we have John L. Scott 41A and an MLS 41A, and those are the amendments to the 41. And then both have a 53, which is a termination. So if I sign a John L. Scott 41 with Kylie, I am not using an MLS 41A to amend it. Okay? I don't care what form you use. I personally like the John L. Scott form better, but you should read through both. They say the same thing. I've always liked the John L. Scott form better because of this circular section they have that talks about the steps of buying a home. I think that's such a great segue into being able to display your value, and it's on a contract. So with the John L. Scott form, I've highlighted some areas. So first highlighted areas, we're just putting the buyer's name, the date, and the area. Okay. If the area is not filled in, it is unlimited. I don't love that part. I like to be specific. Paragraph 1, broker's name. But you can read in the MLS form, or I'm sorry, the John L. Scott form. Congratulations, you have taken the first of many important steps in your home buying journey by partnering with John L. Scott Real Estate. We are committed to guiding you through the entire home buying experience. There's not verbiage like this in the MLS form. Okay, the MLS form is all about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So you should read both and find out what suits you better. Exceptional service, exceptional results. I highly suggest that everyone should be going through and fine-tuning their buyer consultation. But John L. Scott is dedicated to helping you make informed, educated, and confident choices throughout the home buying process. This may include evaluating your current market and developing a corresponding pricing and offer strategy, partnering with you and your lender to enhance your position with competing offers, negotiating a purchase and sale agreement with a price and other terms that work for you, working with you through any contingencies that are part of your contract with the seller, and working together with other professionals who will be involved in a successful home closing, including loan officer, underwriter, inspector, appraiser, title company, and escrow. Now, I personally love that paragraph. It really has no contractual binding to it. However, it's really displaying what you're going to do. Page 2, paragraph 3 is your term. This is very important. And you can see how on the slides, I put 120 or 1. In real estate, we tend to stick with similar time frames, right? If there's an inspection contingency, it's likely 5. Closing dates, 30. Like, with this term, it's important that we're more strategic, depending on if Kylie just wants to see this one home and I don't know her, we could be non-exclusive and working together for a day. Once we build a relationship, we're going to amend it to exclusive when working together for 120 days. So that's kind of where we're at with the term. Agency relationship. Does everyone feel they know the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive? Okay. Exclusive is we're only working with each other. Non-exclusive is we're out there playing the field. I think the 41A is going to be used often. I don't want to say every time, but I'm going to guess that at least 80 to 85% of the time, when you have a buyer representation agreement signed, I bet there's going to be a 41A to amend the terms. It's important that you know that if neither box is checked, non-exclusive is the default. If you have a non-exclusive agreement with a buyer, and that buyer has another agreement with another broker, the only way you would get paid is if the buyer purchased another home on a property you wrote an offer for. Okay? So at this point, procuring cause is a slippery slope. Going after a buyer with buyer agency agreements isn't going to happen often. But if you wrote an offer on that property and the buyer purchased it, you might have some definitely more skin in the game. Okay. Single agent limited dual broker. Okay. Our brains have been trained that if there is an initial and a date box, we get everybody to sign it. Okay. That doesn't have to be the case. So I just met Kylie. Kylie doesn't know me very well. Do I want to ask her about how comfortable she is with dual agency situation? Maybe, maybe not. I could not talk about it and then a week later put a listing on the market and figure out it's a good fit. And then I could bring it up to her. So you definitely have flexibility. You don't have to have this signed. It can always come with an amendment. Property listed by another firm broker, another broker from the same firm, which then means I'm limited dual. Okay, that's nothing that's changed. Okay, that's always been the case. Compensation. The compensation for the firm's service provided pursuant to this agreement is set forth below. There are no standard compensation rates, and the compensation is fully negotiable. I highlighted that because I wanted to make sure y'all read it. So if you didn't read it and a buyer says, hey, Bob, it says here your commission is negotiable. You need to know how to have that conversation. Compensation amount. Okay, this is where you should probably slow down with your buyer. Okay. The buyer purchases a property covered by this agreement. Buyer agrees to pay the firm the following compensation at closing. So you probably need to preface this with, hey, buyer, don't let this language freak you out. Let me go through the whole contract. Okay. A1, you check the box with a percentage or a flat fee. Okay. So whatever you charge is up to you. We are not a discount brokerage. So I could say my fee is $20,000. A2, if buyer broker is a limited dual agent and represents both buyer and seller, then the compensation for representing the buyer will be equal to the amount set forth in the previous paragraph, or you put in a percentage or flat fee. So this is very similar to a listing now. A listing used to say, my fee is $40,000, but I, as a listing broker, will give the buyer broker $20,000 of that. Now it's broken out to, this is my fee, this is what we're compensating for the buyer broker, this is what happens if I'm dual, this is what happens if buyer's unrepresented. So the paragraph reads very, very similar to a listing agreement. Buyer understands and agrees if any firm's broker, including buyer broker, act as a limited dual agent, firm may receive compensation as both listing firm and buyer broker firm. So again, hey buyer, none of this is new. They just changed the contract to become more transparent. Unfortunately, I think it confuses things a little bit, but I'd rather talk it through and be transparent and eliminate any confusion. Non-exclusive agency, this really talks about that if a broker is non-exclusive and the buyer doesn't buy with them, the only way they could be compensated is if they wrote an offer on that property. It's still not going to be cut and dry, but that's really the only avenue for compensation when you're non-exclusive. C, compensation after expiration or termination. Okay, if buyer purchases a property in the area, 60 days is the default. After the term, buyer shall pay the firm the compensation if you were exclusive and the property was brought to the buyer's attention during the term of the contract by the efforts or action through the information secured directly or indirectly from or through the firm, the buyer broker that the buyer inquired about. So if I take Kevin to the property at 123 Banana Street, I emailed it to him, I showed it to him. We part ways, and 10 days later, he buys that property. Or non-exclusive, again, you would have to prove that you had written an offer on that property. Compensation offered by seller. Many sellers will offer compensation to a buyer brokerage firm, either directly or through the listing broker. In the event the seller offers compensation to firm, the offer will be stated in the purchase and sale agreement and may be accepted by buyer on behalf of the firm. Any compensation actually paid by the seller to the firm will be applied toward buyer compensation obligation set forth in paragraph section 6. This is the part I would focus a ton on. So, hey buyer, on page 1, we talked about what my fee is. But on page 2 right here, and there's nothing to say you can't highlight sections when going through this with a buyer. But right here it says any compensation actually paid by seller to firm will be applied towards buyer's compensation obligation. Okay, does everybody get that? But that's what a buyer wants to hear. So A, if seller's offer of compensation is equal or greater than the compensation set forth in 6A. So if my fee is 20,000, let's say the compensation is 25,000. Or the same. Buyer shall accept the seller's offer of compensation. Any excess amount, is it paid to the firm at closing? Credited to the buyer to the extent allowed by buyer's lender, or any non-allowable amounts shall be paid to firm. So basically, my fee is 20,000. And we're saying if the seller's offering 25,000, what happens to this $5,000 difference? Is it paid to my firm? And the buyer says, no, I want that credited to me. Okay, buyer, if it's your practice to do this, buyer, I'll credit you the difference, but if the lender doesn't allow it, because they may not, there's a max, it would then go back to my firm. Or credited to the seller or other. And then it says buyer is not obligated to separately pay firm. Okay. So I love this paragraph. I really wish it was all on the same page. But I think you could preface it. Okay, B. If seller's offer of compensation is less than the compensation set forth. So my fee is 20,000, but the seller is only offering 15,000. Buyer shall accept seller's offer of compensation, if any, and pay the balance of the compensation to the firm at closing. Request in the purchase and sale agreement that the seller pay more compensation to the firm or other. If seller refuses to pay compensation equal to the compensation agreed in subsection 6A, and buyer proceeds with purchase, unless otherwise agreed upon or prohibited by law, buyer will remain obligated to pay firm the difference. Okay, are we all following along? Do we have any questions?
What would other could that be?
You know, I've racked my brain about that one and I don't quite know.
Good enough.
Yeah, I don't know what. I mean, you could put,
Like 2 ways to go, isn't it?
well, or you could say that buyer would only be responsible to pay, you know, X amount. Cause so this is saying, my fee is 20,000. And I'm getting really creative here. My fee is 20,000. Seller's offering 15,000. If the amount is less, buyer, you have to pay it. Or we get the seller to pay it. I don't think, I was going to say, what if you said buyer pay the difference up to X amount, like not to exceed this amount, but then that is in complete conflict with page 1. So, sorry, Norm, I had to
That's
talk
okay.
through that one.
So if the seller and the buyer refuses to pay.
That's a really tough one. I mean, they have a contract to pay. They said they would pay, but it's up to you. It really is.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
If buyer and seller refuse to pay, so if the seller's offer is 15,000 and my fee is 20. And the seller says, I won't pay the difference. Well, the buyer already said they would. But it goes beyond this, right? We all know that if a buyer forks out an extra $5,000 for your compensation, what if that messes with their debt to income ratio or their number of reserves? And what if they then can't finance the property? So anytime, and this is just the best practice, that a buyer is pulling money to pay, you should be talking to their lender.
Yeah.
Because agency law doesn't go away here. It is still your duty to do what's in the best interest for the buyer. Nowhere do you have to work for free. However, you have to look at the whole picture.
So should you tie the lender in always from the beginning on this?
I would,
So
yeah,
that- So
absolutely,
that they know what, so there's no surprises.
absolutely, yeah.
What you wanna do is talk to the lender and make sure they have extra money.
Yeah.
If they
okay,
have
I'm
money to
trying
pay you, because if there's no extra money to pay the commission, guess what?
Yeah.
The deal's dead.
And, I mean, even realize the contracts have changed drastically. But so far, I'm not seeing any trend in the MLS of $500 commissions or 0 commissions. We're not seeing any of that yet.
Only,
So,
only with builders.
yeah. we're
I've
definitely
seen one
like,
already. I seen one already 3 weeks ago.
But one,
But it's not builder, it's
I
not
look for
builder.
trends. You're always gonna have these one-off crazies. You're always gonna have these people that list their home for 200,000 above value, you know, so you can't take a one-off. But
It's
what-
so less price, so I'm assuming that the buyer agent get that compensation, 20,000, and the home on the market only for less than 10 days.
But it's one of these things where we also want to educate the buyers on the practicality. I would pull up listings and say, oh, look at, just to show you in the Renton Highlands area where we're looking, look at these SOCs, and I would visually show them. It's probably gonna be a non-issue. This is a Washington state law.
You're
So
saying show them what,
show them
What?
listings of what compensation is being offered. we can't say this is standard. We can't say this is typical.
Yeah.
They're
It is
kind of
what
putting
it
a
is.
muzzle on our mouth. But what I can show you is that this home on 123 Banana Street is a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, this many square feet, and offering this as compensation. This one at 502 Banana Street is offering this. I can show them trends because it's public information. But I can't say standard, typical, that type of thing. Filtering listings. Regardless of the amount of the seller's offer of compensation, buyer broker will bring all relevant listings to buyer's attention unless otherwise agreed to here. So Dave, my buyer, my compensation is 20,000. After talking to your lender, you only have 5,000 available for compensation. Do you want me to not show you any properties that are offering less than 10,000 in compensation? Okay, that's what that means. Showing properties where no compensation is offered by the seller. Buyer broker shall or shall not be obligated to show properties to buyer for which there's no seller offer compensation and buyer has not agreed to pay commission. So Dave, my buyer, there are some builders that they don't offer compensation. Buyers can only have representation if they pay for it themselves. Do you want me to show you those kind of properties? And it's just that clear.
Shy, so you keep saying 20,000, I know it's just a number. Do you need to say a number or can you say a percentage?
Well, I can't say it because I'm talking to a big group.
Yeah.
So I have my Shy Bundy number of what Shy Bundy charges to work with buyers and sellers. But when anyone, if we're in a large group setting, because we're all competitors, okay? If I said a certain percentage, that would look as though I'm teaching there's a standard rate of percentage. So I pulled 20,000 out of my hat
Okay,
just for teaching purposes.
okay.
But whatever Lori charges,
Yeah.
you can charge 15% for all I care. Just make sure you get
So you
it.
Good luck. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to say a flat number.
No,
You can say-
I'm just doing that
Okay,
due to
yeah.
the recording aspect of this class.
No, that's fine, I just wanted to understand.
Sure.
Okay,
Like you said earlier, the majority of listings are still gonna pay you a
yeah,
percentage.
right,
And the normal percentage, which you can't say normal,
right.
is 2.5. So there's still people out there paying 3%, and some are only paying 2%. But that's what she said, when you do the representation with your buyer, is show her the listings, show them, your buyer, the percentage the seller agrees to pay.
No, I like that though. 'cause
Yeah.
That's hard facts.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the listing
Yeah,
also.
that takes away the,
Right.
the conversation.
So, we've got a builder who says, unless you have accompanied the buyer on the original appointment, then compensation will be reduced to 1%. Is there a place that would go in here, or would that just be back to you agreeing on a certain amount?
Well, yeah, so, I mean, so there's two different things going on here. Number one, it's a variable rate commission. The builder has to, and I'm sure they did, put all their paperwork in appropriately to ensure that this is a, showing compensation restriction. So there's that. If your person went and looked at it and they're gonna buy it and you're only getting offered 1%, that is paid as offered. But, and this is going old school, in my consultations, I have always given my buyer a stack of business cards to say, if you go into open houses without me, you need to let them know you're working with me. Especially because there's this new law and everybody's gonna get you to sign a contract, and I don't want you to get into a pickle. And if you go into new construction, you need to put me down as your broker, because that's the only way that I can ensure that you're going to be properly represented. All right.
Thank you.
VA financing. We all know that VA buyers are not likely going to pay any additional funds and compensation. We had it happen one time, and I'll say the broker spent 3 days making it happen. But most VA lenders will not allow for a VA buyer to pay for anything additional. No warranties representation. I'm gonna go a little faster through this other stuff. Of course, we recommend inspections. No distressed home conveyance, fair housing. Gration, attorney fees, and other agreements. Okay, so this is what you want filled out if you're gonna use the John L. Scott form. The 41A. I believe this will be used a ton. Because if we're doing a 1 day and a non-exclusive, and this, you have to look at these contracts as a little bit more fluid, okay? Usually we sign a listing agreement and here's 60 days and we're going on the market on this day and this is what it is. And we'll get a signature if we need to reduce your price. I think this is gonna be more interactive. So if you need to change the term. So I signed a 1 day non-exclusive with Kylie, and the next week we met and we decided that we wanted to work together. So I'm gonna do an amendment extending our term to 120 days. I gotta roll back on that for a minute. If I did a 1 day with Kylie and we met the next week, that would have been expired. So I have to do a new one. But if Kylie and I that same day decide to continue working together and we want to extend the term, that's where you would do so. If you're going to change from a non-exclusive to an exclusive or vice versa, I don't know why you would do the vice versa, but that option is there. Number 3 is powerful, especially for teams. Additional buyer brokers. Firm appoints the following co-buyer broker to represent the buyer with buyer broker. So if you have someone that helps you open doors, attends inspections, any of these things, you need to put their name in here. The amendment creates an agency relationship with co-buyer broker and any of the firm's broker who supervise co-buyer broker. The agency relationship with co-buyer broker will terminate upon termination of agreement if not completed. This section is different than the MLS, and I like it. Okay. I like it in the event that I am going on vacation for 2 weeks and Sam is going to help out with my buyer. Hey, buyer, I'm going on vacation. My associate Sam is going to be helping you out for 2 weeks. And I can put a termination date in there for when Sam is done being a co-buyer broker. I think that's powerful. Okay, so that aspect is different than the MLS.
Could you put a date right there in that paragraph?
Upon termination, yeah, so it's upon termination of agreement or, and then other, you can put a date. So if I get back into town January 31st, I can say January 31st, and then Sam is no longer a co-buyer broker. But let's say we're talking about the Van Pelt teams and Luke and Dawson work buyers together. They can just have that name in there. So it's important to know if anybody is talking to or working with your buyer in any way, their name should be on this form. Limited dual agency. So if you didn't discuss this in a Form 41 and now you're going to amend it, or co-buyer broker as limited dual agency, okay? If Sam helps me while I'm out of town and Sam happens to take them to one of my buyers to his listing, now Sam is dual. And there's no taking Sam off and saying, oh, no, now you're not. We'll omit Sam as the co-buyer broker and you'll just be the listing broker. That's a big, don't do it. And then compensation. So let's say we are in the event that I said, my compensation is 20,000. And we get to it and the seller's only offering 15,000. But if Kylie pays me 5,000, she won't qualify for her loan. The lender said she can only pay me 2,500. That's what's gonna go in the other box. Okay? Because in the original form, Kylie agreed to pay the difference. And it's my job to make sure Kylie's contracts are in order. So if I allow Kylie to pay me less, I need to put it in writing somewhere. And for her peace of mind also. Signatures on the back, and then termination. Okay. It used to be that if I decided I didn't want to work with Kylie, sorry, you just sat next to me, you got in the hot seat today. Or if she decided she didn't want to work with me, we could end the relationship via email, text, whatever. Now you need a paper trail, okay? And this is important too, because there's a tail if somebody goes and buys a property. So the buyer representation agreement between firm and buyer dated. So this is like what you do on a purchase and sale agreement. It's not the termination date. It is the date the Form 41 was signed. Compensation after termination. If buyer purchases a property within 60 days is the default. After termination, buyer agrees to pay firm compensation, the amount set forth in section 5 of this agreement, if not filled in. If during the term of the agreement, 1, exclusive agency, the property was brought to the buyer's attention by the efforts or action of, or through information secured directly or indirectly from or through firm or buyer broker, or that buyer inquired about firm. So if you were exclusive, you sent them the property, showed them the property, something along those lines. If they buy it within 60 days of the termination, you may be owed a compensation. For non-exclusive, just like we've talked about, compensation would happen only in the event that you wrote an offer on the property the buyer ended up purchasing. Okay? If y'all are terminating your relationship and things are sour, make sure you save your paper trail of trying to get the buyer to terminate. Your text messages, I left him a voicemail on this date, here's the email, I sent it electronically. The DOL has been, they were pretty strict with their audits, and then they really lightened up over COVID. We've gotten 100% on our audits for the last quite a few years. Everything I'm hearing is the DOL is coming hard. So when it comes to our biggest flaw as a firm, and I know this through and through, is when you turn your paperwork in. So this 2 days has to really become a priority. It just does. Unaccepted offers have to be turned into SkySlope. Okay, if we go back into a frenzy market and it takes you 5 offers to get this buyer into contract, that has to get into SkySlope.
No one did that.
Kevin,
I don't think no one-
everybody does it.
I don't want that.
Don't you have nothing else to do?
The multiple offer? the-
Yeah, you just, I mean, you have all this time to put in all those.
So Sky, this might be a, you can't answer because you're being recorded, question. But is there any reason, it seems like you would use the John L. Scott form over the MLS form just because it's more controlled with that? I mean, is there
I
advantages? I would.
I think the advantages are, it is a great segue to be able to show your value.
Yeah.
With paragraph 3 and that circle, I just think it's a very easy segue. Some brokers are better than others at demonstrating their value. And I love the co-broker. And again, this is me personally, because I use it. I other brokers to help me show houses so I can be at the office. So for me, being able to have a termination date on that and add somebody right from Jump Street is beneficial to me. So that's what I
I mean,
like
it
about it.
seems like it's more,
And
Oh,
there's a
he's
little bit
there.
more frills to it.
yeah.
MLS is all business.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
So I'm gonna go
Good
through.
answer.
I'm gonna go through this a little bit more
Yeah.
speedy because it's all of the same content. The term is 60 days if not filled in. The agency relationship is the same. If it's not checked, it's non-exclusive. I urge you to check the boxes. I recently had an issue. Luckily, we were in the right. Can you give me a water, please? Where on the purchase and sale agreement, where the commission says paid as offered, it was our seller and the buyer broker did not mark it. And we had a commission dispute. Because the broker did not check that box, we won. Technically, according to our lawyer, we could have said, you get no commission. Now, we didn't really want to bark up that tree, but we won because he missed that box. So when there are defaults, you are safe, but it kind of goes against the spirit of the law of being transparent with people. So I urge you to fill out the blank lines and to check the boxes. The compensation in paragraph 5 is the same as the John L. Scott. Buyer acknowledges that there are no standard commission rates, and the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. The compensation for the buyer broker's firm's service shall be whatever your percentage or flat rate, or in the event that you're a limited dual broker. Now remember, if you're a limited dual broker, you have already set your compensation rate with the seller. Paragraph 6 is the same as John L. Scott's. In the event your fee is different from what the seller is offering. Seller's offer is equal to the compensation. If seller's offer is equal to the compensation, buyer shall accept the seller's offer and buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay firm. What happens in the event the seller's offer is greater? What happens if the seller's offer is less? Okay, same type of thing. Paragraph 8, this is in the John L. Scott form, but it's worded a little bit different. Showing properties. Buyer broker shall or shall not be obligated to show properties to buyer for which there's no seller offer and buyer has not agreed to pay the compensation. Listings. Buyer broker shall bring listings to the attention of buyer regardless of seller's offer exceptions. So, hey buyer, do you want me to not even send you these? Or I can send them all, and do you not want me to show you? Okay. We are going to jump 2 pages. So we have the MLS, sorry, I had to backtrack. MLS 41A, which is the amendment. Very much the same as the John L. Scott amendment. And the termination is very much the same. Okay. So we're gonna jump to 41C. When do we use this form? This addendum may be used to modify the amount of the buyer brokerage firm compensation paid by the seller in the following circumstances. Okay, I'm reading something you don't. If there is no offer of compensation in the listing, the 41C will allow the buyer and the buyer broker the opportunity to negotiate for compensation for the buyer broker to be paid by seller. This provision can also be used to negotiate for compensation from the seller if the property is not listed. So I charge 20,000, seller's paying 15,000. This is what I would use to ask the seller to pay more. This form also allows for the buyer and buyer broker. Sorry, I just said that line. To enable the buyer broker's firm to reduce its compensation and have the seller credit the amount of the reduction to the buyer's obligations at closing. Or if you're reducing your commission. So this form is obviously going to be in alignment with what you agreed with the buyer on 41, okay? So we have 5 check boxes. Checkbox number 1, buyer broker's firm compensation, no compensation offered by seller. There is no compensation from seller to buyer brokerage firm in the listing, so it's a 0. Or seller has not signed a listing agreement. It's off market. Seller shall pay buyer broker's firm commission of blank % of the sales price or a flat fee. Section 2, additional buyer broker's firm compensation, buyer broker service agreement. Buyer is obligated to pay buyer broker's firm compensation as a condition of a buyer brokerage service agreement between buyer brokerage firm and buyer. Seller's offer of compensation to buyer brokerage firm in the listing is less than buyer's obligation to buyer brokerage firm. Accordingly, the seller agrees to pay buyer brokerage firm additional compensation of percentage of sales price or flat fee at closing. Buyer broker's firm total compensation paid by the seller shall be X. So the first box is if there's no compensation being offered. The second box is if you have to ask the seller to pay more, and then you put in the total amount. Third box is credit to a buyer. Buyer brokerage firm compensation shall be reduced from the amount offered in the listing by X, and seller shall credit such amount to buyer's obligation at closing. If buyer is obtaining a loan or loans to purchase the property, seller's credit to buyer is subject to buyer lender's approval of such credit. Any amount not approved by buyer's lender shall be paid to buyer brokerage firm. Buyer brokerage firm total compensation paid by seller shall be X sales price or a flat fee, not including any accredited amount not approved by lender. A reduction in the buyer broker's firm. Compensation.
No,
Oh. Made my heart skip a beat. I'm like, did I read it wrong? Buyer broker's firm compensation shall be reduced from the amount offered in the listing by percentage or flat fee.
no,
Buyer brokerage firm total compensation shall be X percentage or flat fee. Okay. This form is going to be used depending on what you and your buyer agreed to as your compensation. What you and your buyer agreed to as any difference. If the seller pays me more than we agreed, if the seller pays me less than we agreed. Okay. So this is a huge overhaul, not only with the law, but a lot of new contracts. You should, in my opinion, and we're going to be, we're still working on doing deep dives into contracts. And we're going to be putting together some buyer classes. We have some buyer best practices. We are very likely going into a frenzy market. If rates go down to the mid sixes, hovering a little bit below 6.5, and we're still at historically low inventory, it's likely we're back in multiple offer land, which is my favorite land to be in. But you need to slow down with this. Most important, yes, your contracts need to be correct. They need to be in alignment. You need to follow the law. But remember, it's about your value. There is a difference between the cost of something and the compensation and the value of something. So yesterday, and Sadie was sitting in on this with me, I interviewed a new broker who came from a different John L. Scott office. And she's interviewing multiple John L. Scott offices. And she's like, this person and this person, they'll match my previous contract, which was peanuts. Peanuts. And I was like, sorry, I won't do it. I just won't. I said, well, let me think about what I am willing to do, but I won't match it. And I lost her. I'm pretty sure I lost her. And I'm okay with it. Because if you can't see our value, and especially what we offer new brokers to get their business up and running, I probably don't want you here anyways. So you have to understand it's important, especially for our newer people, to articulate your value, because people will pay more when they know what that is, and they'll be successful. If the people don't pay, like this particular broker, whom I very much loved, I don't want her here because she didn't see the value. So you really need to keep that in mind for when you're doing your presentations. This is not about contracts and compensation. It's about, why do they value from being represented by you? What do you bring to the table? That makes sense?